Tonight, as we go through this, we are talking about how to help orphans. And this, obviously, as we talked a little bit about this morning, about what this specifically is. I know that some of you in this room, you are actively involved in this process. Some of you are maybe considering it. And so what we want is a wonderful opportunity just to sort of unpack some of this stuff together. On the handout there, it says, believers are called to find some way to assist orphans. Learn how your family could help through adoption, foster care, respite care, or even financial assistance. So tonight, what I want to do in the first 10 minutes is to be able to give you a big picture, and then you're going to hear from some wonderful professionals to sort of hear how our church can come alongside and help. Personally speaking, obviously, our family thinks that adoption is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. We think it is a beautiful thing because not only are we adopted by God, is what Scripture teaches us, but we have the wonderful opportunity to adopt others as well and bring the family. So we think it is a wonderful thing. We would encourage others, and it was so neat. Just recently, someone had asked our family, there's a friend of our family who has a 5-year-old boy, and he said, wait a minute, the Agnews are adoptive family? We didn't know that. And I was like, yeah, actually we are. And then they just sort of see, hey, this is our family unit and whatnot. We also see that sometimes when you say yes to God's call, a lot of times you think that you're just helping one situation or saying yes, but you don't realize that sometimes you're actually going to be a catalyst for someone else. And so tonight, as you discuss, it's not only maybe what you might be called to, but what it may lead someone else to do. So these couple of points I want to make really quick. The first one is this: God eagerly adopted us into His family. As believers, that's why we do what we do, that God eagerly adopted us into His family. And Scripture is very clear about this kind of terminology. In fact, I want to give you a few verses in just a few moments just to be able to show you how much of a beautiful picture this is, that when God speaks about how we are brought into the family, He uses the word adoption. If we look at these verses here, Ephesians 1:5 says, in love, He predestined us for adoption to Himself as sons through Jesus Christ, according to the purpose of His will. So it says He brings us into the family. He adopts us. He sees us and says, you know what? You had a different father, so to speak, spiritually. You are from a different place, but God says, I want to bring you into the family. This is something beautiful and wonderful. Then we look at Galatians chapter 4, verse 5. And you may just want to write down these references as we're going through, but it says that Christ came to redeem those who were under the law so that we might receive adoption as sons. And this is a beautiful picture. In fact, when you read those verses, it says, even beyond that, it says, and because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of His Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, then an heir through God. A lot of times people ask the question, why did Jesus come the way that He did and the time that He did? You remember when the disciples asked Jesus, can you teach us how to pray? What were the first words that He started His prayer with? You might know, our Father. And so if Christ came, if He wanted us to think of God as a general, He would have come as a commander. If He would have wanted us to think of God as a master, He would have come as a servant. But He wants us to think of God as a father. That's why He came as a son. And so when He says that we want to pray our Father, it's not our master, not our commander, not our CEO, it's our Father. And so there's this picture that God is saying, I adopt you, I bring you into my family. 1 John 3:1 even says this, see what kind of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called children of God, and such we are. And so this is beautiful that God says, I look at you and I see you and I love you so much to say, you're mine, you're my kids. And so this picture of adoption is not just something practical that we do. It's something that God has done into our own families, into our own lives. And I just think it's absolutely wonderful to think of God saying this. Don't miss this. God saying, I want you in my family. I desire you in my family. Now, that's one thing. A lot of times people ask questions of adopted families. Well, when you adopt, you don't know what you're getting into. Have you ever known what you're getting into with any child? Any way it came into your life? I mean, honestly, if a child comes through biological within the home, you don't know what you're getting into. You just know you're not sleeping a whole lot, right? God knew everything He was getting into with us, and He still wanted us. Isn't that beautiful? He wanted us. He chose us. And so this picture of adoption is important because it's not like God saying, well, I didn't know this was going to happen. He goes, well, I knew this was going to happen, and I still wanted you as a child. So God eagerly adopted us into His family. Number 2, God calls believers to care compassionately for orphans. Throughout the Scriptures, God is going to repeatedly say, the Old Testament, New Testament, that God calls believers to care compassionately for orphans. He has a big heart for those who are in need in some type of way. And so he's going to come alongside and say this is going to be part of the call that he provides for us. Also, make sure you know this. Adoption in the Old Testament, the New Testament time, a lot of times we'll see this, it was never a thing of, well, we're doing something for some poor, unfortunate person. It's like, no, this is a wonderful thing. I want this child. I desperately, I would love to have this child. And so it's a compassion, but it's care. Look at these verses here. James 1:27 is often referred to, where it says, pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and Father is this, to visit orphans and what? Widows in their distress, and keep oneself unstained from the world. He says, okay, so someone who says they want to be religious, he goes, I got pure religion for you. I got undefiled religion for this. Meet needs. Meet needs. Meet needs of orphans, meet needs of widows. Why? Because those are some of the people that can't take care of themselves in such a way. So he says, you want to do pure and undefiled religion, this is a great place to start by caring for those that are in need. Here's another verse for you, Isaiah 1:17, where he tells the people, learn to do good, seek justice, reprove the ruthless, defend the orphans, plead for the widow. Hey, I want you to do something about their cause. I don't want you to leave them where they cannot care for themselves. I want you to obey this passage. So Isaiah 1:17. And here's another one. I just absolutely love this. Psalm 68, 5 and 6. It says, a father to the fatherless and a protector of widows is God in his holy habitation. Now just stop there. Isn't that beautiful? Where people need him the most is where God sets up camp. That's his holy habitation. That's where he lives. That's where he dwells. So for some of you who felt like, I felt like a fatherless child, or I felt like a widow who has no one to fend for, that's where God dwells most intensely, is in the place where you need him most. And then it says this, look at verse 6. He says, God settles the solitary in a home. He takes those that are abandoned and separate and says, you are coming into a home. And so how does he do that? He does that as he calls on believers to say yes to his call on our own lives. So God calls believers to care compassionately for orphans. And number 3, there are many ways that exist regarding how you can care for orphans. Many different ways that you can care. If we specifically speak about this need that's in the Bible, there's many different ways exist regarding how you can care for orphans. And I'm going to put these 5 kind of titles up here, and then we're going to unpack a few of them a little bit better. Here's 5 ways that I would encourage that everybody in this room can do something about. Number 1 is international adoption. Number 2 is domestic adoption. 3 is foster care. 4 is respite care. And 5 is financial support or assistance. And so when you look at these, let me make sure you understand what this is. International adoption would mean that you're adopting a child that is somewhere outside, guess what? The United States, right? And is there a need there? Absolutely, there's a need there. These ladies that are about to come up can probably give you better numbers, but I know that when God, you really sort of opening our hearts for adoption, at that time there were 143 million orphans in the world at that day. 143 million orphans. And so for us, for our purposes, we thought, we see all the needs, and here's what I know. A lot of people can kind of war against, well, international's better than domestic, domestic's better than international foster care. Here's my tally on this. Any child that finds a home is better than them not finding a home, okay? So I think any child from any of these ways is a good thing. And so we have 2 agencies here today, and they're in the same work. They're in the same ministry, in the same calling. So international adoption is something that you do for a child that's outside the United States. One thing to consider with that, there's a lot of times that there are children outside the United States are not going to have some of the care, comfort, and honestly just accessibility to certain things that can be found in the United States. Now, the orphan care system in the United States is not glorious, it's not wonderful, it's not anything, but there is a different level of things that are needed in the international. Domestic adoption is that a type of adoption that you do within the United States, but it is normally a private type adoption. Here's the difference between domestic adoption and foster care. Domestic adoption is an adoption where you are going through an adoption agency to you're saying, I want to adopt a child, bring in that child into our home. We know that. Foster care is you are saying, I am willing to have this child in our home for really an unknown amount of time. And the goal of foster care, at least in the state of South Carolina, is the reunion of the biological family with that biological child. That is the goal. That's the goal always. Now, sometimes the state decides that cannot happen. For the child's best interest, that cannot happen. That will not happen on our watch. And then that child becomes available for adoption. And so some people will be at a place where they have been fostering a child, and then all of a sudden that child comes up for adoption. And those who have been watching and over that child will say, we want them to have their forever home with us. The difference here, just to make sure you also understand this, domestic adoption, there are a lot of financial commitments that you would have to find from day one. Foster care is not so much, because this is something partnering with the state, and the state are saying, we need some help here. We need someone to come alongside this. But the problem that a lot of people have, as many of you know that have gone through foster care, this is a hard task to do, because you might have a child in your home for 6 days or 6 months or 16 months, and then all of a sudden that child is taken out of your home. And you have to go in knowing that's a possibility. And you say, Lord, we're going to do with whatever time you have, we're going to be faithful, and we're going to love on this child, share the gospel with this child, be good to this child, and we're going to trust you for the results of it. So the difference there with international adoption, domestic adoption, and foster care, and once again, these ladies will unpack this a little bit better. Respite care is a little different situation. Respite care is this. We know that we don't need to foster long term or adopt. We're not in a place to do that. But here's something that I've really encouraged people to do. If you are a foster parent and you were at a need to say, I don't know, if you had to take a business trip, or you wanted to go on a date with your spouse, or you wanted to help someone else out, you know what you can't do with a child who's placed in foster care? You can't just take them to the babysitter down the road. Because now you have the state of South Carolina and a lot of legal stuff going into that. Who's watching over this child? You need someone who's been licensed by the state to provide respite care for those foster families. And so there are some people who have said, I've had many people that have been middle-aged senior adults and said, I cannot care long-term for a child, but I can be on the respite care list, which means this. When a foster family in our church are fostering kids, and yet sometimes mom and dad just need a date night, or they need to do some other stuff, respite care steps in and says, I can watch the child for a day, give you a Saturday, give you guys a night out. And I just, for all the foster families, I'm not going to make you stand up and say this, but that is a blessing if that's there. It's very much needed. And so for some of you, now here's the problem. You still got to go through some training and some stuff to do that. But I'm saying what a great thing for some people to do, to say we could at least be that hands and feet to really to give the foster care families a little bit of breath of fresh air at certain times. And the last is this, is financial assistance. And ladies, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but number 3 and number 4 would not be a necessary major financial cost unless there is something that has to happen in your home to meet you up to code. Now that changes year to year. A few years ago, we had somebody that the state had denied. There were friends of ours that had denied to be foster family because their windows were a half an inch not wide enough. They basically were this, and they needed to be this to meet code, and the family said you cannot have kids and you cannot foster kids because that half an inch window, if a fire broke out, they couldn't get out that window. And I thought, I don't know what kind of kids they've been measuring, but I guarantee that kid can get out that window if there's a fire, right? Now that has changed. Those codes, that has changed, but from time to time, there are certain families that have to do certain things to get their home up to code with. But mainly there's financial assistance needed in 1 and 2. And there are a lot of people that I know that have a heart for adoption but say, we just can't physically do that right now. Could we come alongside a family and help do that? And the answer is that yes. Yes and amen. You get to be a part of that story. When we were going through our adoption process, I love to see how the Lord allowed me to pick up extra jobs, to do certain things, to be able to raise money, and then also how sometimes God would just bring somebody that I didn't see coming. And I remember somebody coming up to me one day and said, I want to just give something to your family. And I said, well, I haven't asked for anything. I said, no, you haven't, but God has told me to, and I want to help you get there. And can I just tell you that amount in that envelope is exactly what we needed for the next set of legal fees and all the different things that we needed. And just saying that God works in all types of ways to do that. And so tonight, as you hear some of these stories, it's good for us to think of what role that you could fit in there. If you turn this page over, you see 2 things. It says Bethany Christian Services and Miracle Hill Foster Care, and then a Q&A. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this over to our Bethany Christian Services representative, and going to give her about 20 minutes to sort of speak about what they do and how you guys could partner with this. And then after that, Miracle Hill is going to talk a little bit about what they do, and then I'll sort of wrap up and just sort of make sure there's any kind of questions we got. So I'm going to ask Brooke Thompson to come up, and I also just want to warn everybody, Brooke Thompson and I grew up together. So I say this saying, y'all behave, and whatever she says, do not believe if it has to do with me. Okay, there you go. Can we give it up for Brooke as she comes up here?
Hey, thank y'all so much for having me tonight. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you up front, I'm breaking like the #1 rule of public speaking, and I'm chewing gum while I do it, because I get dry mouth when I talk a lot, and so the gum helps with that. So I'm going to apologize for that now. So I've been at Bethany Christian Services a little over 2 years, but I've been doing child welfare. I've pretty much worked in every area of child welfare for about 14 years now. So what I'm going to do is just talk to you about our programs and kind of how you might come alongside us, and then maybe if you're interested, what next steps might be. So Bethany is actually a global organization. So we have we have offices in over 36 states, and we're in 15 countries. And so each state that we're in is considered a branch. So South Carolina is a branch. We have an office here in Greenville, and so we cover 12 counties in the upstate out of the Greenville office. We have a Columbia office and then a Myrtle Beach office, so we serve the whole state. I'm an adoption specialist and the lead staff here in the Greenville office. So our first program that I want to talk about, and I'll just spend a little bit of time on it, and if you want to ask questions afterwards, you can. Sorry, I just saw one of my kids poke their head through the door back there. So it's called Safe Families for Children, and we only have that in our Greenville office right now, and it only serves Greenville County at this time. But it is a prevention program to kind of get involved with families before children go into foster care. So if there's a family that is at risk of abuse or neglect, has not happened yet, they don't have an open DSS case, that family can call us, and we work with churches to recruit host families that have to go through a process that's not quite as involved as being a foster family, because it's not that, but there are safety checks and some home visits. But those people are saying, we will volunteer to have a child come stay in our home. And so we usually start out doing about a 45-day stay. It's really intended to be short-term, so it's not going to address some of those, like homelessness. That's not really going to be resolved in 45 days most of the time, but some other, things that might be going on. We also work with churches to recruit different sort of volunteers to come alongside that parent and teach them how to budget, or to take them shopping for an outfit to wear to an interview, or talk to them about, this is how you act in an interview. Let's kind of do some questions and just really come alongside that parent and help them be ready to get their kids back in 45 days. And sometimes it's longer, but typically it's about that length of time. And so if you want to know more about that, it's completely voluntary for these parents, so it's not like they are losing custody. They're just agreeing for their child to stay with another family for a few weeks. So not many people know about that program that we do, but it's a really neat one. And it really goes from the thought of, why would we wait until something happens before we get involved? And DSS is a reactionary agency. They cannot get involved until something happens. So this kind of stands in that gap for these families where we know that it's a risk and we don't want it to happen. Our second program that I want to talk about is our pregnancy counseling program. So this is where we meet with expectant parents to talk to them about adoption if they are wanting to know about that. It's completely free. It does not cost them anything. It's non-judgmental, non-coercive, and non-directive. So we're not there to tell them what to do. If they want to know about parenting in their county as well, then we'll help them find the resources in their county that are going to help them parent their child successfully if they decide to parent. But if they want to hear about adoption, we're also going to talk to them about how to make a plan of adoption. And it's really important to us. It's usually the women. We love it when we can get an expectant father involved, but it just doesn't happen as much. But we want them to know that this is your decision, this is your baby, and it's really important to us that they know that the language we use is intentional. So we don't say things like, put your baby up for adoption. That comes from language from the 1800s, when orphan trains would literally come through towns and put kids up on stages to be auctioned off. And that's not really just a good description of what they're doing. They're coming to us and saying, I want to make a plan. So they're identifying the family that they want. They're saying, this is the type of openness I want. And so it's really a lot more involved. And so we work with them at any point in the pregnancy. So I've had women call and they're like, I think I'm 4 weeks. And so I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about this. You've got a long ways, but we'll walk through this with you. Or what we call surprise babies, which the day I interviewed, she said, we had a surprise baby last night at the office, kind of crazy. And I was like, how do you have a surprise baby? But it was a surprise to us. So that was a situation where the hospital called and said, there's a baby born and this mom wants to talk to y'all about adoption. And so, everything, all the same things have to happen, just much quicker. And so we can provide, help them with pregnancy-related needs. So if they can't pay their rent that month, then we can help with that. The law allows for us to do that. If they want to, or if they can't pay their light bill or whatever, we can help them with that. And for our purpose, this is our ministry to these women. We don't want them to feel punished because they chose life for their child. There are so many women that call us and talk to us, and then we never hear from again, and it is really hard to know that they might have chosen abortion for their child. And just a couple weeks ago, I made contact with a girl again. She said, yeah, I had the abortion, and I broke inside. It just was really hard to hear. So we don't want them. We know how easy that decision would be. It would be so easy for them to choose that. And so they're choosing to do this, to go through this pregnancy. And even if they don't make a plan of adoption, they've come to us and kind of explored it. That says a lot for them and how much they love their child. And so we are there, and many times these women don't have anyone else. We have had women come to us and they go to the hospital, they drive themselves there, they give birth, they make an adoption plan, they sign the papers, and they go home, and no one else knows that they were even pregnant. Now, of course, we encourage them to tell people they trust so that they can have supportive people around them, but we can't make them do that. So, many times we're that person for them. We're the support for them. And so we have a pregnancy counselor in our office. Her name is Lizzie, and that is her job, is to come alongside these women and walk with them through this really tough time. And then our adoption program. So we have international adoption and domestic adoption. Most of our domestic adoptions are infants straight from the hospital, but occasionally we'll have someone come to us with a child that's a little bit older. I had a grandmother come to see me last year who had adopted her 2 grandchildren a couple of years before, and she was just she said, I'm older and I can't do the things that they want me to do with them, and they deserve better. And they were 6 and 7. And so ultimately a family member that lived right beside her stepped up, which was wonderful and beautiful, but we could have done that. So, and we were there for her as she made this decision, which was really, really hard for her, as you can imagine. So, but I'll start with our international program. So if you're interested in international, you would work with your local office to get your home study done and kind of support along the way. And then for the post-placement visits that country requires and that Bethany requires, our global office, which is up in Michigan, is going to help match you with the countries that you qualify for, because different countries have different things that they're looking for. Some of them you can't have been married before. Some of them don't allow a single applicant. Some of them have financial requirements. Some of them you have to be in country for a max of 3 weeks. Some of them you have to be in country for a minimum of 6 to 7 weeks. And so that makes a huge difference for families. And so they kind of help families figure out which countries they fit with best and qualify for. And so we work together with that. And the paperwork is pretty much the same, except you're going to have some extra stuff because you have to send in the dossier and do all of that, which is a compilation of lots and lots of paperwork. Travis could talk to you more about that probably. But generally speaking, for our international and domestic, of course, we're going to do background checks. So that's fingerprints, sex offender registry, central registry, which is the database that's kept by DSS. And so if you've lived in any other state since you're 18, we have to check in all of those states. We require references. You have to go to the doctor to make sure that you are healthy enough to adopt a child and you're gonna have a normal lifespan as much as we know now, and that you're free of communicable diseases. We do a drug test and a TB test, and so we require. I'm trying to think through everything. Our first step would be an information meeting, so we hold those every other month. If you don't want to wait for the next one, I can set up a one-on-one with you in our office and go through that. It's about 2 hours, and you get 2 hours of training for that, because total with us, you need 30 hours of training. So you have that 2 hours. We have a 8-hour day in Columbia where we talk about the adoption process. We talk about grief and loss in adoption. We talk about the financial aspect of it, the legal aspect of it. We have birth parents that have placed with us come in and talk about their experience and answer questions. We have a transracial panel, so we have families that have adopted a child of a different race come in and talk about that experience. We also do training on that. And so we really want our families to be prepared for what is going to happen with them in this adoption situation. And a lot of people do talk about the financial burden that adoption is, and that's a real concern. But I think at least with our agency, when you know the services that we provide to these expectant parents that are free to them, and they can come back to us at any point. I met with a lady a couple months ago who had placed her child 14 years ago. And she said, I'm not doubting my decision. I still know that was the right thing. I'm just kind of struggling emotionally, and no one in my life really gets it. And I just need to talk to someone who gets it. And so she came in, we talked for about 45 minutes, and I said, I'd be happy to help you find a mental health counselor that you could go see regularly. And she said, I think I'm good. But that's the kind of thing that our fees pay for, is doing that above and beyond to make sure that these birth parents are well taken care of. There's so many myths in domestic adoption, that the mother didn't love her child, or that they can just move on and they'll forget about this child that they made an adoption plan for. That is just not how it works. I mean, if you're a parent, can you imagine having to make that decision and then everyone around you expecting you to just move on? It just doesn't work like that. And they love their children very, very much. This is the hardest decision they're ever going to have to make, and they're doing it because they think it's the best plan for their child. And so our fees go for that. And if you are identified by a mom and we have paid $2,000 for her in rent and utilities or whatever, we're going to tell you that up front. We call that a pass-through cost, because if she places the baby, it then passes through to you. But if you meet her and get to know each other, and then at the hospital she decides, I can't do this, I'm going to parent, I choose to parent my baby, then you're not then responsible for those fees. We absorb that. That's what our fees go for, because we know that that's a financial burden. And so we are really a full-service adoption agency, meeting our adoptive families' needs before, during, and after, and then the placing parents' needs before, during, and after the adoption. The home study, I don't know how this never occurred to me before now, but about a year ago, it hit me that people get nervous when I come to their home to do a home study. And I don't know why I never thought that. I feel like I'm friendly and people wouldn't think that, but they do. And so it's really just a time to get to know families. So if that's something that you're really nervous about, then don't be. It's a time where we talk about what your strengths are going to be in parenting, and then some areas where you might need to get some more training and learn a little bit more. And that doesn't mean we're going to deny you. It just means we want you to get a little bit more knowledge before you proceed. I'm a foster parent. I'll talk about that in just a second. I'm not going to steal your thunder though, Brenda. But I have 3 daughters that are a different race than I am. So I've had to do a lot of things to make sure that I am meeting their needs and parenting them in a way that's sensitive to the culture they've grown up in. And so we want our adoptive families to feel the same way. I will say up front, one of our biggest things that kind of freaks people out is openness. For most parents, that's like, ooh. So here in South Carolina, I'll just kind of tell you, once a parent signs a relinquishment of parental rights paperwork, there is no revocation period. So they can't change their mind. We don't say that because when they sign those papers, it's done. And so, whereas like Georgia has a 10-day revocation period, so they literally can come back and change their mind, but here we don't. And so we make sure that we've talked to this mom about that so that she knows that she knows that she knows when she signs those papers it's the right thing. We don't let her do it when she's under pain meds. We're not even in the room. We hire people to come in and do it for us so that she doesn't feel pressured by us sitting in there. So that's really good. And then we have something called the Responsible Father Registry in South Carolina. And so any man who thinks he might have fathered a child with a woman can go on there and register under her name. And then if there are any adoption proceedings started, he has to be notified. And he can't say, I didn't know about the registry, because ignorance of the law is not an excuse. And so he can't say I didn't know, and he can't say I didn't know her name, because if you want to know what's going to happen with a child you might have fathered, the law says it's his responsibility to ask the name of the woman he's having sex with. So there are a couple other things, but we discuss this up front with all of our adopted families. We discuss it up front with all of our expectant parents. Everything that we do is going to be above board. We're going to tell you that to start with. So when we talk about the fees, that is what it's all going to. And I'm just really scratching the surface in 20 minutes. I'd be happy to schedule a meeting in my office or meet for coffee or whatever, and I can stay afterwards. But one of the attorneys that we work with a lot said something to me a couple weeks ago, and it really just kind of struck home about the fees that are involved. And he said, we don't think twice about buying $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 cars. And this is a child that we're paying a ransom for, basically. And there's one of my favorite quotes. It says, my friends, adoption is redemption. It's costly, exhausting, expensive, and outrageous. Buying back lives costs so much. When God set out to redeem us, it killed him. And so I don't say that to put a guilt trip on anybody if you don't feel okay with the fees, but I want you to know that it's not just because we're out here making bank as social workers, because that's not it. But there's a lot that goes in it with paperwork. And so I guess I just want to wrap up and say, if you have more specific questions, I don't want to bore the whole group with all the paperwork stuff. I can talk to you more about that one-on-one. But that's what we do. We offer that support. I'm pretty much on call 24/7, and I love it. So we're there for you. And then I just will say about foster care, I'm a foster mom. I've got 3 girls placed with me right now. And if anyone is considering that and you're scared of what you might get, I'll just go ahead and tell you the biggest problem in my home is me. And that has been the most refining experience, is having children come into my home that have experienced terrible things that no child should have to experience, and how God has used that to expose and purge the sin from my heart, and how he kind of has to do it over and over again sometimes. So if you are scared about that, then I'd love to talk to you as well, but I encourage you to do it. You'll be blessed beyond what you can even imagine by taking a chance to get hurt. And really, at the end of the day, we're adults. If me getting hurt can keep children from getting hurt, then I choose that every day. And so I don't want to take too much of what you're going to say, but that is something that has really changed my life. And so again, thank you for having me, and I'd be happy to talk with anyone. I've got some brochures. I didn't bring stuff to set up a table, but I've got a lot of brochures about our services. So anyway, thank you.
So good evening, everybody. My name is Brenda Parks, and I am the director of the foster care ministry at Miracle Hill Ministries. And certainly most of you probably are very well aware of Miracle Hill, but if you would just allow me just a minute to share with you about Miracle Hill Ministries. We are a gospel-infused mercy ministry. We exist to care for God's people, to meet the needs of God's people. And that includes men, women, and children. And so I have been invited, and I thank certainly Pastor Travis for giving us this privilege to come and share with you about foster care and how you as God's children can support what he has so certainly talked to us about. And so as I sat, as you were sitting, listening to Pastor speak, I couldn't help but think of a word that he used. It was on the second, number 2. He talked about compassion. Think about compassion with me for just a minute. For you see in the book, again, we're gospel. So we know that whatever we do, we work at it with all our heart as though we're working for the Lord, Colossians 3:23. And so we want you to know tonight that as I speak, I don't speak for Brenda Parks. I actually have been in child welfare for more than 3 decades. I've done everything from adoption, and certainly God has brought me here now to do foster care, and I'm privileged to serve families over the last several decades. I've seen babies grow up to become social workers. And for that, I've been grateful. But go with me, if you would, to the Word of God. 2 Timothy 3:16-17 says, all Scripture is inspired of God, and it's given to us for a purpose. And tonight, one of the purposes is to inspire and to teach us and to give us instructions for corrections. And so we're going to think about what he says in 1:16. Talks about how God is merciful and gracious, and he's compassionate. That's what it says in 1:16-5, if you would read it. And so I thought about that, Pastor, because I thought about one of the earliest child who found himself in foster care. And you Bible scholars probably know who I'm talking about. You know that in the book of Exodus, there was a little boy that found himself in a river going down the lake. And there was a woman that got up early one morning. It was Pharaoh's daughter. You know the story. And she didn't get up for the purpose of taking a child home. She did not get up for the purpose, I'm going out because I'm going to be a foster parent. No, she got up to do what she normally does, just a usual day. The Bible tells us that she got up and she went to take a bath, in the river. And then her servant girls were all around. You know the story. And then off to the side, there was a care and concerning mother. But you see, here's the thing. In many ways, that child represents who our children are that come to the attention of the Department of Social Services. For you see, any child that's abused and or neglected comes to the attention. If you have some concerns about a child, then it behooves you to call DSS and say, hey, I got some concerns. And DSS is mandated by law. We pay their taxes. And so they're mandated to respond and go check on the child. And so here's what happened that day. You see, this little boy found himself down the river. Can you go down the river with me? He found himself in basket situations. So let me tell you about the basket situations that our children are finding themselves in. They are coming from criminal domestic violence homes. They're coming from families where there's abuse and neglect, where substance abuse, where people themselves are hopeless. Basket situations. But yet Moses was in a basket situation. But the scriptures tell me, if you would just walk with me just a little bit in the book of Exodus, the 2nd chapter, if you would walk with me just a little bit, if you would look at the 6th verse in that chapter, the Bible says, when she said, yeah, go get the basket, bring it to me. Let me see. And they said, she opened it. And my brothers and sisters, they said when she opened it, they said she saw and the baby wept. Let me tell you, good folks, our children are crying. They're crying. And sometimes you don't hear them, but they're crying. They may seem silent, but they're crying. They're crying because they miss their family. Yes, they do. They've been picked up today from school and they don't know why. And it's really not their fault, but it's because of some decisions that adults are making. Their parents have made some choices that have always not been in the best interest of that child. And so, yes, they're crying. And so the question remains, who will have compassion on the child? Just like Pharaoh's daughter. The Bible says, and I love the King James Version, you see. I have here, this is ESV version, and I was reading it, and it says pity, Pastor, but that's okay, because who will have pity? But I love it because I love the scriptures talk about how Jesus himself has compassion on us. And so I know that if you're like me, you like to put on what Jesus says. Follow me as we follow Christ, right? And so you're going to put on compassion. And how is that going to look? What is it going to look like? And so you talk about foster care. Well, that's what foster care, he told you. She told you. It's because they're children. Children who are in basket situations, who are crying, who need somebody to, out of their extraordinary day, just a regular day, who to get up and see and say, you know, Lord, I did not get up today for this. But you sent it our way. You sent it my way. So, yeah. And so here's the thing about that. If you go with me just a little bit further in that same story, I love it because it is the very first foster child. Because here's the thing, Pastor. The thing about foster care is when you are a foster parent, the state of South Carolina has a responsibility to offer some board payment, some support to the foster families. You know, you heard Ms. Brooke talk about the expense of adoption, and while there are some, certainly the riches are so much better. But when you a foster parent, the compassion outweighs everything because you just have to expose yourself. You know, we don't want to know all about you. Yeah, we got to know who you are, and we're going to make sure that you have the capacity. Here's the thing, and here's the thing about Miracle Hill, you guys. You see, we're a gospel-infused ministry. Compassion is one of our core values. And what does that mean, foster parents? It means we care about you. Because we realize that you matter. We've got to care about you. And how does care look? Well, care doesn't cost much. Care costs, our Father, who art in heaven, bless this foster parent, God, for opening up their doors. Bless them, Jesus. Hear my prayer. Hear my prayer, God. I'm praying for, you know what? I am praying for the Smoke family. I'm praying for the Anderson family. I'm praying for Pastor Travis. Yeah, we understand the power of prayer. 1 Thessalonians 5:17 says you got to pray at all times. That's what it says. It says in Matthew 6:33, seek ye first. We understand that there's a root for compassion. And so we're going to care about our families. And so we need you. Some of you will hear the clarion cry, and you'll be like Pharaoh's daughter, and you'll say, yeah, take this child. And she said, yeah, take him and take care of him. And you know what? And tell her. This is the part that I love it. Pastor, the first board payment, tell her I will pay. Read it for yourself. It's in the Word. It is written. And so, what can you do? Well, God gives everybody in this room the capacity to have compassion. Compassion. And so, will you be the one that, like the Smoke family, and actually roll up your sleeves and go through the home study process and become a foster parent? Will you be that family? You very well may be. And we would work right alongside you, helping you navigate and making sure that this is the right thing for you and your family, praying alongside with you. Will you be the respite family? You heard Pastor Travis talk about respite. Respite says take a break. Because let me tell you, yeah, I talked about the basket situations these kids come from. These kids are challenged. They're traumatized. Trauma? How can a kid be traumatized? When you're removed from the very thing that you knew that you thought was all true, you would be traumatized too. Let me ask you, anybody in here ever lost their cell phone? No. You know how nervous and anxious you get and you start blaming everybody next to you that, where's my cell phone? Where's my cell phone? Come on, people, be real with me. You have anxiety associated with the misplacement of your cell phone. Imagine the misplacement of you from the main family that you know. Trauma, it's real. Trauma, okay? So we say to foster families, take a break. It's healthy. I'm a big proponent of it. I want you to be successful. God wants us to be. You know, I love it because here's the thing. And Jesus, in the ministry of working, God, in the book of Luke, it tells me that Jesus, he often pulled away and he went to a desolate place and prayed because he knew the importance in his fleshly self. So we need to understand our weaknesses and that we need to take a break. And so we need people like you who say, okay, I can't do it all the time, but I can do it. For what period of time did you want this, Parks? Well, I found out that Mr. Smoke is going to take his lovely wife to Hawaii for 5 days. Did you hear that? Who's signing up to be the respite family? I know some of you are ready to run forward right now and say, yes, Andrew, won't you do it? Won't you be the respite family for this lovely family? You're going to take your wife to Hawaii. Isn't that what you just told me? There it is. And Andrew, aren't you going to be the respite family? Aren't you going to do it? Because you want them to take a break and come back healthy and rejuvenated. Yeah, amen. Yeah. Yeah, respite. But let me tell you something else that's important. Financial support. You guys know that everything needs some finances. You know, we are a nonprofit. We exist because God allows us and he puts us in the hearts of those giving, even congregations who wrap their heart. We're just a parachurch ministry working, doing God's will. And we pedal because you give us the energy. You make it possible. And so a little thing that you may take for granted, when a child comes into a foster home, that foster family ideally should put everything else aside. Yeah, put the cooking aside. What do you mean put the cooking? They got to eat. Yep, they got to eat. But you know what? This family's going to feed them. This family is going to make casseroles. This family is going to provide gift cards because you know what? Right now, this family is going to devote every time and attention to the child that just come to this home. You know why? Because I need to be made to feel like I belong. I just lost everything and I don't feel like I need to be here. No, I don't need to be here. But you're going to devote your time. You're going to devote your attention to me. So they need somebody to support them. They got added expenses of laundry. Send some dish detergent over. Send some laundry. Send a care package over. Oh, you know what? I'm going to give you some Chick-fil-A gift cards. One of the biggest things that I love to be able to provide for our team. I'm one of the servants there at Miracle Hill. One of those servants who love to be able to give a foster family, hey, here's some gift cards to go to Chick-fil-A. Take a break from the kitchen. Can you give it? Some of you got pockets that you can reach in and you can give that. No, you may not be able to be the foster parent, but can you help us care for the foster family? Can you help us provide for the children? What you doing? It's real simple. So I brought some handouts, gospel infusement. It's about doing God's will. Simple as that. God's compassion. Thank you, Pastor. Compassion is the way to go. Thank you. Please come by and talk with me. The process is similar as far as coming. We have orientation. I'll tell you a little bit more about that when you come, and you'll hear a little bit more. But I don't take it lightly that I've had this privilege on behalf of Miracle Hill to stand before you tonight. And I pray God's blessing upon you. Thank you.
Well, I just wish that we had some people that were passionate about what they were doing here tonight. Brooke and Brenda, we thank you for taking time. We know that Sunday night there's a lot of stuff that you have to do, and your family, but this is such an important part of you spending your time and investing here. One of the things I think is important, Brenda and Brooke, one of you may know this, but how many children are in need of a foster home in the state of South Carolina right now? Do you know that number?
Yeah, So currently in the state of South Carolina, there are in excess of 4,700 children in the state of South Carolina, nearly 5,000 children in foster care. What's interesting about those numbers is the majority of them find themselves in the upstate. The majority, more than 1,500 children, are in foster care in the upstate. We serve 10 counties in the upstate, Greenville being that has the most foster homes, but we'd love to serve everybody, so we invite you, but yeah, good number.
And how many families do you need right now? Like how many placements?
So here's the thing. What the agency is projecting, when I say the agency, I'm talking about DSS as well as Miracle Hill. DSS, we work in collaboration with DSS, would love to be able to more than 1,000 more families. 1,000 more families. But here's the thing. Who, like the scriptures talk about, we'd be happy with how many? And I don't know. Maybe tonight, maybe somebody's at the river seeing a child in a basket situation. Maybe somebody tonight will say, hey, we hear you, and we're going to support you. Yeah.
That's awesome. So if you think about probably 1,000 needs for more families in this state just to cover what is there right now, and some of you have seen news reports sometimes of a child or when DSS is just overwhelmed and going, what are we going to do? 1,000 families. I texted my friend just a little while ago while you were talking, as it made me think of, and I just asked, I said, how many Southern Baptist churches are there in South Carolina? Not Methodist, not Presbyterian, just our tribe, our little tribe, folks. Y'all ready for this? 2,125 in South Carolina. 2,125 Southern Baptist churches in South Carolina. There's about a need for 1,000 more families. If we could just get one for 2 churches, we got it fixed, folks. So what I'm saying is that maybe there'd be some people here today the reason why I said this morning that if it's something you always said you wanted to do, oh yeah, we'd love to foster or respite or adopt in about 2 years, you probably needed to start yesterday. I mean, there's a lot of times there's a lot of process to walk through. And once again, you don't know when the Lord is going to say, hey, today is the day when you need to step into this. And so I think for every single one of us that what we want to do is to make sure that we are available and ready. And like you said, it's all part of the process. The Chick-fil-A gift cards, the prayer, the support, going along with it, all part of the process. Really quick, we have about 3 minutes left. Does anybody have a question either for anybody that was speaking here today or anything regarding adoption? On your mark, get set, go. Y'all just did that well. They don't have any questions.
I will add one other way to help. Children in foster care have a lot of appointments, and I have found myself as a single foster mom needing help with transportation to appointments a lot of times. And I'm part of a church in Spartanburg that has an adoption and foster care ministry that has just been amazing to wrap around me and help with that. And so that's something that I would not have thought of before I was in the need.
Yeah,
So.
for sure. I think it's just as I said, there's all types of ways that we can come alongside and meet needs. I think what's beautiful is, as you mentioned, Moses being fostered. I think we have someone else that was adopted from day one, and that was Jesus. Joseph was not his biological father. Only God could get the credit for that birth. And what does Joseph do? He comes in and says, this is my boy. And I'm going to love on him, carry him, take him to the carpentry shop, show him the family business. He's my boy. And so I think it's such a beautiful picture is whenever we get to a situation like this, adoption and foster care, these situations are beautiful when God brings together a family. And a lot of times I will tell anybody, only God can bring together a family. I don't care how a child comes in the home, only God can do something like that. But when you look at it, when we talk about these situations, normally they are birthed out of a crisis. They're birthed out of something, a reminder, things are not the way they should be for whatever reason, whether it's sickness or neglect or whatever. But here's where the church steps in and go, just because things are not the way they should be doesn't mean that we're going to sit on the sidelines. We're going to get involved. And we're going to do what we can do, and we are going to change some lives. And so tonight, my prayer is this, that for some of you, you may have said, okay, Lord, I just sort of came tonight because I had nothing else to do. and maybe the Lord is pulling your heart into something. These crew will be here later to talk with, but also I know that they're more than willing that if you say, I got to go, but can I call the office or talk with you, that's what they love doing, and there's no kind of fee associated with just getting some questions answered. And so once again, I just want to encourage us as a church. There are a lot of needs here in this community and around the world. And the beautiful thing is this, that we have been blessed in order to be a blessing. And so we never want to forget that. And so, Father, tonight.